Marcus had always believed that hard work spoke louder than words, but nothing could have prepared him for the moment his boss's daughter would try to humiliate him in front of the entire executive team, only to discover that the tables had already turned in ways she never imagined. This is a story about respect, hierarchy, and the devastating moment when someone's true character is revealed in the most public way possible. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor conference room in downtown Chicago, creating a rhythmic backdrop to what would become the most pivotal meeting in Marcus's career. The November storm had been building all morning, with dark clouds rolling in from Lake Michigan like an omen of the confrontation that was about to unfold. He adjusted his navy suit jacket, the same one he had worn to his first interview at Bennett & Associates 8 years earlier, and checked his watch one final time before stepping into the sleek boardroom where Bennett & Associates held their monthly strategy sessions. Please subscribe to our channel to help us bring you more real stories like this one, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. Your support means everything to us. Marcus Williams had spent 8 grueling years climbing the corporate ladder at Bennett & Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious consulting firms. Starting as a junior analyst fresh out of Northwestern University with student loans that kept him awake at night and a determination that burned like fire in his chest. He had worked 16-hour days, sacrificed weekends, missed family holidays, and poured every ounce of his ambition into proving himself worthy of partnership. His journey had been anything but easy. He remembered those early days when he survived on vending machine coffee and convenience store sandwiches, when he slept on the office couch more often than his own bed, when he questioned whether the sacrifices would ever pay off. His colleagues respected his analytical mind and his ability to see solutions where others saw only problems. His clients trusted his judgment because he delivered results that exceeded their expectations, and his mentor, senior partner James Bennett, had quietly groomed him for greater responsibilities over the years, recognizing in Marcus the same hunger and drive that had built the firm from nothing. But there was one person who never seemed to see Marcus as anything more than hired help. Victoria Bennett, James's 28-year-old daughter who had waltzed into the company 3 years ago with an MBA from Wharton, a trust fund that could buy a small country, and an attitude that suggested the world owed her everything simply because she bore the Bennett name. Victoria had been handed a senior management position without earning it, skipping over the years of grinding work that everyone else had endured, never having to prove herself in the trenches or demonstrate that she could handle pressure when millions of dollars were on the line. She made sure everyone knew that blood ran thicker than performance reviews, often making comments about the family business and how some people were born for leadership, while others were simply meant to execute orders. Marcus had watched her dismiss brilliant ideas from seasoned consultants, override decisions made by people with decades of experience, and claim credit for successes that she had nothing to do with. What frustrated him most wasn't her incompetence, that could be fixed with time and training, but her complete lack of awareness about how her behavior affected the team and the company's culture. The November morning felt particularly cold as Marcus made his way through the Loop, the familiar sounds of Chicago's business district providing a comfortable rhythm to his thoughts. The wind whipped off Lake Michigan with a bite that cut through even the heaviest coats, and the sidewalks were slick with a mixture of rain and early frost that made everyone walk a little more carefully. Street vendors were setting up their coffee carts despite the weather, steam rising from their equipment like small clouds of hope in the gray morning. Marcus passed the same newsstand he had walked by every day for 8 years, where Tony the vendor always greeted him with a cheerful morning, "Counselor," even though Marcus had explained countless times that he wasn't a lawyer. These small rituals of city life had become anchors in his routine, reminders that even as everything else changed, some things remained constant. He had been working on something special for months, something that would change everything, but he kept those details close to his chest, sharing them only with the handful of people who absolutely needed to know. Today's meeting was supposed to be routine: quarterly performance reviews, budget discussions for the upcoming fiscal year, and strategic planning for new market opportunities that the firm was considering. Marcus entered the conference room to find the usual suspects already assembled, each carrying with them the weight of their own professional ambitions and personal struggles. There was Patricia Wong, the head of operations, a brilliant woman in her early 40s who had immigrated from Hong Kong 15 years earlier and built her career through sheer determination and an attention to detail that bordered on perfectionism. She was shuffling through her quarterly reports with her characteristic precision, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she made last-minute notations in her neat handwriting. Patricia had always been fair to Marcus, recognizing talent regardless of where it came from, and he had come to respect her judgment more than almost anyone else in the firm. David Reynolds, the senior account manager, was typing furiously on his laptop with the kind of focused intensity that suggested he was dealing with a client crisis. his graying hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it, a nervous habit that emerged whenever he was stressed. David was probably responding to emails from their biggest client, a Fortune 500 company that demanded attention at all hours and had made David's personal life a casualty of professional success. Sarah Martinez from Human Resources sat quietly reviewing personnel files, her expression neutral but observant in the way that made everyone slightly nervous, as if she could read their deepest professional insecurities just by watching how they held their coffee cups. And then there was Victoria, positioned at the head of the table as if she owned the place, which, Marcus supposed, she technically would someday unless something dramatic changed the trajectory of her career and her father's succession plans. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun that seemed designed to project authority she hadn't earned, and her designer suit, probably Italian, definitely expensive, fit her perfectly in a way that suggested she had never had to worry about shopping off the rack or waiting for sales. She was scrolling through her iPhone with the kind of casual disrespect that made Marcus's jaw clench, occasionally sighing dramatically as if the very act of being present at this meeting was beneath her station. Victoria had a habit of treating these sessions like inconvenient interruptions to her real work, whatever that might be, though Marcus had never been entirely clear on what she actually did during the hours she spent in her corner office with its view of Millennium Park. James Bennett entered the room with his usual commanding presence, the kind of natural authority that couldn't be taught or inherited but had to be forged through decades of making difficult decisions and living with their consequences. His silver hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour and the weather outside, and his charcoal suit was impeccable in the way that suggested he had been dressing for success since before most of his employees were born. At 62, he still carried himself with the confidence of a man who had built his firm from nothing into a multimillion-dollar operation, working out of a shared office space in the suburbs 30 years ago and slowly, methodically building the reputation and client base that had made Bennett and Associates one of Chicago's most respected consulting firms. He had always been fair to Marcus, demanding excellence but providing the support and resources necessary to achieve it, and Marcus had come to think of him as something of a father figure over the years, especially since his own father had passed away during his third year at the firm. James had quietly covered the cost of the funeral and given Marcus the time he needed to grieve, never making a big deal about it but making sure Marcus knew that the firm took care of its own. "Good morning, everyone," James said, settling into his chair at the opposite end of the table from his daughter. A seating arrangement that Marcus had noticed seemed to reflect the emotional distance between them as much as the physical space. James had confided to Marcus on more than one occasion his frustration with Victoria's attitude and work ethic, his concern that he had somehow failed as a father by not instilling the values that had driven his own success. The older man's relationship with his daughter was complicated by the early death of Victoria's mother, who had passed away from cancer when Victoria was in high school, leaving James to navigate both parenthood and the demanding world of business consulting without the partner who had helped ground him for so many years. Let's begin with our quarterly performance review. Marcus, why don't you start us off with your division's numbers? I know everyone is eager to hear about the strategic consulting team's performance. Marcus opened his leather portfolio, the same one his mentor had given him when he made senior consultant, worn but still elegant, and began presenting the results he had achieved over the past quarter with his characteristic blend of confidence and humility. His team had exceeded their revenue targets by 18%, a remarkable achievement in a competitive market where most firms were struggling to maintain single-digit growth. They had secured 3 major new clients, including a Fortune 100 manufacturing company that had never worked with an outside consulting firm before, and maintained a client retention rate of 94%, which was almost unheard of in an industry where clients frequently jumped between firms based on the latest trends or the most aggressive pricing. The numbers spoke for themselves, but Marcus also took the time to explain the strategies behind the success. The innovative approaches his team had developed, the long hours they had put in to exceed client expectations, and the collaborative culture that had made it possible to deliver results that consistently surprised even their most demanding clients. He could see the impressed nods from his colleagues as he walked through each metric, Patricia Wong making notes that he knew she would reference in her own presentation, David Reynolds actually looking up from his laptop with genuine interest and respect. "Excellent work as always, Marcus," James said with genuine pride in his voice, the kind of paternal satisfaction that made Marcus feel like all the sacrifices and late nights had been worthwhile. "Your leadership of the strategic consulting division continues to be exemplary. The client feedback forms we've been receiving are consistently outstanding, and I've had 3 different competitors try to poach you in the past 6 months, which tells me we're doing something right." Victoria looked up from her phone for the first time since Marcus had begun speaking, her green eyes cold and calculating in a way that reminded him of a predator studying its prey. She had been unusually quiet throughout his presentation, which should have been Marcus's first warning that something was building beneath the surface. "That's all very impressive, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying the kind of condescending tone that instantly put everyone in the room on edge. "But let's not forget that you're presenting these numbers to the people who actually own this company. Let's not get carried away with our own importance here." The room fell silent with the kind of uncomfortable tension that made everyone suddenly aware of their own breathing. Patricia Wong's pen stopped mid-sentence, frozen above her notepad as if she couldn't quite process what she had just heard. David Reynolds actually looked up from his laptop for the first time in 20 minutes, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. Sarah Martinez's eyebrows rose slightly, though she maintained her professional composure with the practiced skill of someone who had witnessed countless workplace confrontations over her 15-year career in human resources. The only sound was the rain continuing to pound against the windows and the barely audible hum of the building's ventilation system, creating an atmosphere that felt charged with the electricity of an approaching storm. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, the familiar surge of adrenaline that he had learned to recognize from high-stakes client presentations, but he kept his expression carefully neutral, drawing on years of experience in managing difficult personalities and volatile situations. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him, waiting to see how he would respond to what was clearly intended as a public humiliation. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean, Victoria," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the anger that was beginning to build in his chest like a slow-burning fire. Victoria leaned back in her chair with a smirk that made Marcus's skin crawl, the kind of expression that suggested she was savoring this moment like a fine wine, relishing the opportunity to put someone in what she considered their proper place. She glanced around the room as if seeking approval for what she was about to say, clearly enjoying the attention and the power dynamic she believed she was establishing. "What I mean is that no matter how good your numbers look, no matter how many clients you bring in, no matter how many hours you work or how much overtime you put in, you'll always be staff. You'll always be someone who works for the Bennett family, not with us. You'll always be an employee, Marcus, and I think it's important that everyone in this room understands that fundamental distinction. There's ownership, and then there's employment, and the two should never be confused." The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished fire, toxic and lingering, filling the space between them with a poison that seemed to seep into every corner of the room. Marcus could feel the discomfort radiating from his colleagues in waves, could see Patricia Wong shifting uncomfortably in her chair, could watch David Reynolds close his laptop slowly as if he couldn't bear to look at anything else, could sense Sarah Martinez taking mental notes for what was surely going to be a very difficult conversation with human resources. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Victoria's manicured fingernails drumming against the mahogany table with the rhythm of someone who believed she had just scored a decisive victory in a game that only she was playing. James Bennett's face had darkened like a storm cloud rolling in from the lake, his jaw working as he processed his daughter's words and clearly struggled with the conflicting emotions of paternal disappointment and professional outrage. Marcus could see the older man's hands clenched into fists on the table, his knuckles white with the effort of restraining himself from saying something he might regret. This was not the first time James had been embarrassed by his daughter's behavior, but it was perhaps the most public and the most cruel, delivered in front of the very people whose respect and loyalty kept the firm running. Marcus could practically see James calculating the damage this moment would do to team morale, to his own credibility as a leader, and to the company culture he had spent decades building. "Victoria, that was completely inappropriate and unprofessional," James began, his voice carrying the weight of years of frustration and disappointment. But Victoria cut him off with a wave of her hand that was so dismissive it bordered on disrespectful, the kind of gesture that suggested she had never learned to fear consequences or consider that her actions might have repercussions beyond her immediate satisfaction. "No, Dad, it's realistic," she said, her voice rising slightly with the confidence of someone who believed she was finally speaking an uncomfortable truth that everyone else was too polite to acknowledge. "I think it's important that everyone understands the hierarchy here, the natural order of things. Marcus does good work, I'll give him that, and I'm not trying to diminish his contributions to the firm, but at the end of the day he's an employee. He doesn't have equity, he doesn't have ownership, he doesn't have a stake in the long-term success of this company beyond his paycheck, and he certainly doesn't have the right to sit at this table and act like he's our equal. Some people are born to lead, and others are born to follow, and pretending otherwise just creates confusion about roles and responsibilities." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Not hurt, but rather a crystalline clarity that cut through years of second-guessing and self-doubt like a laser through fog. He had suspected for months that Victoria resented his close relationship with her father, his success within the company, the respect he had earned from clients and colleagues alike through sheer competence and dedication. He had seen the way she looked at him during meetings, the barely concealed irritation when clients specifically requested to work with him instead of going through the usual channels, the eye rolls when her father praised his work or sought his opinion on strategic matters. But hearing her say it so bluntly, so cruelly, in front of everyone who mattered in his professional world, was somehow liberating rather than devastating. It stripped away any remaining illusions about their working relationship and revealed the fundamental truth about how she saw him and probably how she saw everyone who wasn't born into privilege and position. He closed his portfolio slowly and deliberately, taking his time to ensure that every movement was controlled and purposeful, then looked directly at Victoria with the kind of steady gaze that had made him successful in high-pressure negotiations and client presentations throughout his career. The room seemed to hold its breath as everyone waited to see how he would respond to what was clearly intended as a career-ending humiliation. "You know what, Victoria? You're absolutely right about one thing," he said, his voice carrying a calm authority that seemed to fill the space between them. "The hierarchy here is very important, and I think everyone should understand it clearly. I think transparency about roles and responsibilities is exactly what this situation calls for." Victoria's smirk widened, clearly believing she had scored a decisive victory, and that Marcus was about to acknowledge his subordinate position in some public and humiliating way. She leaned forward slightly in her chair, savoring what she assumed would be his capitulation. "Exactly. I'm glad we're finally being honest about the way things really work around here, about who really makes the decisions and who just implements them. Which is why," Marcus continued, his voice steady and calm but carrying an undertone that suggested something significant was about to happen. "I think this is the perfect time to share some news that I've been keeping to myself for several weeks now. News that I think will clarify the hierarchy and organizational structure in ways that might surprise everyone in this room." James Bennett leaned forward slightly, his expression shifting from anger to curiosity as he recognized the tone in Marcus's voice. The same controlled confidence that had made him such an effective negotiator and client manager over the years. The rest of the room seemed to sense that the dynamic was about to shift in some fundamental way, though none of them could have predicted what was coming next. Patricia Wong set down her pen entirely. David Reynolds pushed his laptop aside, and even Sarah Martinez looked up from her files with undisguised interest. Marcus reached into his briefcase with deliberate precision and pulled out a thick manila envelope that looked official and important, the kind of document package that suggested legal proceedings or major business transactions. The envelope was sealed with the logo of Morrison, Fitzgerald & Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious corporate law firms, and Marcus could see several pairs of eyes in the room focusing on that detail with growing interest. 3 months ago, he began, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone delivering prepared remarks, I was approached by Meridian Capital Group about a potential acquisition opportunity. They had been watching our firm's performance for over a year and were particularly impressed with our strategic consulting division's growth trajectory, our client retention rates, and our reputation for delivering results that exceeded expectations. Victoria's smirk began to fade as she sensed the shift in the room's energy, though she clearly didn't yet understand the implications of what Marcus was saying. She glanced at her father, looking for some sign of what was happening, but James Bennett's expression had become unreadable, his years of experience in high-stakes business negotiations allowing him to maintain perfect poker face even as his mind raced to process the implications of Marcus's words. After extensive due diligence that lasted nearly 2 months and included interviews with our major clients, analysis of our financial performance over the past 5 years, and evaluation of our competitive position in the Chicago consulting market, Marcus continued, opening the envelope and pulling out a bound document that was clearly a legal contract of some kind. Meridian Capital agreed to acquire a 49% stake in Bennett & Associates for $12 million, with the option to increase their stake to 51% within 3 years based on performance milestones. The room erupted in surprised murmurs and expressions of shock. Patricia Wong's mouth fell open and she actually gasped audibly. David Reynolds finally closed his laptop with a snap and stared at Marcus with undisguised amazement. Sarah Martinez actually smiled slightly, clearly impressed by the bombshell that was being dropped in what she had expected to be a routine quarterly review meeting. The sound of shifting chairs and rustling papers filled the room as everyone tried to process the magnitude of what they were hearing. But Marcus wasn't finished, and the room gradually quieted as everyone realized there was more to come. However, there was one condition to the deal that Meridian considered absolutely non-negotiable, he said, his voice taking on the kind of dramatic weight that suggested the most important revelation was yet to come. Meridian insisted that their investment be structured as a partnership with someone who had operational experience, a proven track record within the firm, and the trust and respect of both clients and colleagues. They made it clear that their $12 million investment was contingent on having the right person in the right position to ensure the continued growth and success of the firm. James Bennett's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn, and Marcus could see the older man starting to smile despite his earlier anger at his daughter's behavior. Victoria, meanwhile, had gone completely pale, her earlier smugness replaced by something that looked like dawning horror as she began to realize that the conversation was not going in the direction she had expected. "So as of this morning," Marcus said, placing the signed partnership agreement on the table in front of him, "I am no longer just an employee of Bennett and Associates. I am the managing partner of the Strategic Consulting Division, with a 25% ownership stake in the entire firm." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's face had gone completely pale, her earlier smugness replaced by something that looked like shock mixed with rage. Marcus turned to look at her directly. "So to address your earlier comment about hierarchy, Victoria, you're absolutely right that it's important for everyone to understand where they stand. As the managing partner, I'll be overseeing all strategic initiatives for the company, including staffing decisions for senior management positions." James Bennett was the first to break the stunned silence, and when he did, it was with a broad smile that Marcus had never seen before. "Congratulations, Marcus. I should have announced this at the beginning of the meeting, but I wanted to let you handle it in your own way." Patricia Wong began clapping, followed quickly by David Reynolds and Sarah Martinez. The sound filled the conference room like thunder, but Victoria remained frozen in her chair, her face a mask of disbelief and humiliation. "How is this possible?" Victoria finally managed to whisper. "Dad, you didn't tell me anything about this." James Bennett's expression grew serious as he looked at his daughter. "Victoria, Marcus has been the driving force behind this company's growth for the past 5 years. When Meridian approached us, they made it clear that their investment was contingent on Marcus's continued leadership and expanded role. This partnership agreement ensures the long-term stability and growth of the firm." Marcus felt a mixture of vindication and professional satisfaction, but also something else, a genuine desire to move forward constructively. "Victoria, I want you to know that this doesn't change the respect I have for you as a colleague. We all want what's best for the company." But Victoria was already standing, her chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. "This is ridiculous. This is a family business. You can't just hand over a quarter of the company to some employee." "He's not some employee," James said quietly, but with steel in his voice. "Marcus has earned his place here through dedication, results, and leadership. The Meridian deal wouldn't have happened without him, and frankly, this firm wouldn't be where it is today without his contributions." Victoria looked around the room desperately, seeking support that clearly wasn't coming. Her colleagues avoided her gaze, their body language making it clear that they supported Marcus's elevation. "Furthermore," James continued, "your behavior today has been completely unacceptable. Suggesting that Marcus is somehow lesser because he wasn't born into ownership shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how successful businesses actually operate." Marcus watched as Victoria's world shifted beneath her feet, and despite everything, he felt a twinge of sympathy. He remembered what it felt like to be young and overconfident, to believe that entitlement could substitute for competence. "Victoria," he said gently, "I'd like to schedule a meeting with you next week to discuss your role going forward. I think there are ways we can work together effectively, but it's going to require mutual respect and a shared commitment to the firm's success." Victoria stared at him for a long moment, her green eyes bright with unshed tears of frustration and embarrassment. "You have no idea what you've just done," she said finally. "This family has built something here, and you're going to destroy it." With that, she gathered her things and walked out of the conference room, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor until the sound disappeared down the hallway. The remaining members of the team sat in awkward silence for a moment before James Bennett cleared his throat. "Well, I think that concludes the dramatic portion of our meeting. Let's get back to business, shall we?" The rest of the meeting proceeded smoothly, with Marcus presenting his strategic vision for the newly expanded firm and fielding congratulations from his colleagues. But his mind kept returning to Victoria's parting words, and he wondered if she was right about destroying something important. After the meeting, James asked Marcus to stay behind. The older man walked to the window and stood looking out at the Chicago skyline, his hands clasped behind his back. "I owe you an apology," James said finally. "You don't owe me anything, James. You've given me opportunities one never could have dreamed of." James turned around, his expression serious. "I've failed as a father in some ways. Victoria has never learned the value of earning her place, of proving herself through hard work and results. I thought that bringing her into the business would teach her those lessons, but instead, I've enabled her sense of entitlement." Marcus joined him at the window, watching the tiny figures of people moving through the streets below. "She's young. She can still learn." "Can she?" James asked. "Or have I waited too long to set boundaries?" It was a question that Marcus didn't feel qualified to answer. He had never been a parent, had never faced the challenge of balancing love and discipline when it came to his own child's professional development. "All I know," Marcus said, "is that everyone deserves a chance to grow, including Victoria." James nodded slowly. "That's generous of you, considering what she said today." Marcus thought about that for a moment. Victoria's words had stung, not because they were true, but because they revealed such a fundamental misunderstanding of what actually mattered in business and in life. Success wasn't about who you were born to be. It was about who you chose to become through your actions and decisions. Over the following weeks, Marcus settled into his new role as managing partner. The Meridian Capital deal brought not only financial resources but also new opportunities for expansion. He found himself traveling more frequently, meeting with potential clients and exploring new markets for the firm's services. Victoria, meanwhile, seemed to be keeping a low profile. She attended necessary meetings but spoke little, her earlier confidence replaced by a sullen resentment that was obvious to everyone. Marcus made several attempts to schedule the one-on-one meeting he had promised, but she continued to postpone or cancel. It was Patricia Wong who finally provided some insight into Victoria's state of mind. "She's been asking questions about the partnership structure," Patricia mentioned during one of their weekly check-ins. "I think she's trying to understand if there's a way to challenge the agreement." Marcus wasn't particularly surprised, but he was disappointed. He had hoped that Victoria might use this situation as an opportunity for self-reflection and growth. Instead, it seemed she was focused on finding ways to undermine what had been accomplished. The confrontation he had been expecting finally came on a cold December afternoon. Marcus was working late in his newly renovated office when Victoria knocked on his door frame. She looked tired, and for the first time since he had known her, somewhat vulnerable. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Of course. Please, sit down." Victoria settled into one of the leather chairs across from his desk, her usual poise replaced by something that looked almost like uncertainty. "I've been thinking about what happened in that meeting," she began, "and I want you to know that I still believe you've manipulated the situation to your advantage." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "How so?" "You knew about the Meridian deal for months, but you let me walk into that meeting blind. You let me make a fool of myself." "Victoria, I didn't make you say what you said. Those words came from your own beliefs about hierarchy and worth." She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the arm of her chair. "Maybe, but you could have warned me." "Could I have?" Marcus asked genuinely. "When in our 3-year working relationship have you ever shown interest in my perspective or advice? When have you treated me as someone whose input might be valuable?" The question hung between them, and Marcus could see Victoria processing it. He wasn't trying to be cruel, but he needed her to understand that respect was a two-way street. "I've been raised to believe that leadership means being in charge," she said finally. "My father built this company from nothing, and I always assumed that meant I would inherit both the business and the authority that comes with it." "But what have you built?" Marcus asked gently. "What have you contributed that makes you worthy of that authority?" Victoria's eyes flashed with anger, but it was mixed with something else now, perhaps the beginning of self-awareness. "I have an MBA from one of the best business schools in the country. So do half the people in this building. What else? I understand the industry, the competitive landscape, the—" "Victoria," Marcus interrupted, "I'm not trying to diminish your education or intelligence, but understanding something theoretically and proving you can execute it are very different things." She stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus could see her struggling with concepts that clearly challenged everything she had believed about herself and her place in the world. "So what are you saying? That I don't deserve to be here?" "I'm saying that everyone deserves to be here if they earn their place and contribute to our collective success. That includes you, but it also requires you to prove yourself just like everyone else has. Victoria stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that looked out over the city lights beginning to twinkle in the growing dusk. Do you know what it's like to grow up as James Bennett's daughter? She asked, her back still turned to him. Everyone assumes you have it easy, that everything is handed to you. But there's also pressure to live up to a legacy, to prove that you're worthy of a name that means something in this industry. Marcus felt a stirring of empathy. He had never considered the burden that might come with inherited expectations. I can imagine that's difficult, he said quietly. But using that pressure as an excuse to diminish others isn't the answer. Victoria turned around, and Marcus was surprised to see tears in her eyes. I know what I said was wrong. I know I hurt you and embarrassed myself. But I don't know how to move forward from here. It was the first genuine vulnerability Marcus had ever seen from her, and it changed something fundamental in how he viewed their dynamic. You move forward by starting over, he said. By proving that you can contribute value to this firm regardless of your last name. By treating your colleagues with respect and earning their respect in return. And if I can't? She asked. If I'm not as good at this as I thought I was? Then you find something you are good at, Marcus replied. There's no shame in discovering that your talents lie elsewhere. The shame is in refusing to acknowledge reality and grow from it. Victoria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara slightly. Would you be willing to help me? To give me a real chance to prove myself? Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. What he saw instead was someone who had been forced to confront their own limitations and was genuinely asking for guidance. Yes, he said finally, but it has to be on the same terms as everyone else. No special treatment, no shortcuts, and definitely no more comments about staff versus family. Agreed, Victoria said, extending her hand across his desk. Marcus shook it, feeling like they were finally having their first honest conversation. The months that followed were not easy for Victoria, but they were transformative. Marcus assigned her to work directly with Patricia Wong on operational efficiency projects, roles that required her to prove her competence through measurable results rather than relying on her position or connections. Victoria struggled initially, her theoretical knowledge bumping up against the practical realities of implementation and execution. But gradually, Marcus began to see glimpses of the intelligence and potential that had been obscured by her entitlement and defensiveness. She worked longer hours than she ever had before, asking questions that revealed both her ignorance and her genuine desire to learn. She made mistakes, sometimes significant ones, but she also began to show the kind of resilience and problem-solving ability that successful consultants required. More importantly, her relationships with her colleagues began to change. Without the armor of superiority she had worn for so long, Victoria revealed herself to be funnier, more creative, and more collaborative than anyone had realized. The real test came 8 months later when Victoria was asked to lead her first major client project. Marcus deliberately chose a mid-level account, significant enough to matter but not so critical that failure would damage the firm's reputation. Victoria threw herself into the work with an intensity that surprised everyone, including herself. She spent hours researching the client's industry, understanding their competitive challenges, and developing innovative solutions that drew on her analytical training but were grounded in practical business realities. When she presented her recommendations to the client, Marcus watched from the back of the room as Victoria commanded attention through competence rather than attitude. Her presentation was thorough, insightful, and persuasive, and the client signed an expanded contract on the spot. After the client meeting, Victoria found Marcus in the hallway outside the conference room. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what? For not giving up on me. For holding me accountable. For showing me what earning respect actually looks like." Marcus smiled, feeling genuinely proud of how far she had come. "You did the work, Victoria. I just provided the framework." As they walked back toward their offices, Victoria asked, "Do you think my father is proud of me now?" Marcus thought about James Bennett, who had watched his daughter's transformation with a mixture of relief and admiration. The older man had confided to Marcus that he saw glimpses of his own younger self in Victoria's newfound determination and work ethic. "I think," Marcus said carefully, "that your father has always been proud of who you are. Now he gets to be proud of what you've accomplished as well." Victoria nodded, seeming satisfied with that distinction. 2 years after that pivotal board meeting, Bennett and Associates had grown into one of Chicago's most respected consulting firms. The Meridian Capital Partnership had enabled expansion into new markets, and the firm's reputation for delivering results had attracted top-tier talent and high-profile clients. Marcus had proven himself not just as a skilled consultant but as an effective leader who could develop talent and build successful teams. His partnership stake had grown along with the firm's value, but more importantly, he had found genuine satisfaction in mentoring others and building something lasting. Victoria had been promoted to senior manager based on her performance, not her name. She had developed into one of the firm's most effective project leaders, known for her analytical rigor and her ability to build strong relationships with clients. The transformation from entitled daughter to respected professional had been complete. Looking back, Marcus realized that Victoria's cruel comment in that board meeting had been a gift in disguise. It had forced both of them to confront fundamental questions about worth, respect, and what it truly meant to earn one's place in the world. The hierarchy she had spoken about so confidently did exist, but it wasn't based on family connections or inherited privilege. It was based on contribution, competence, and the respect that came from consistently delivering value to others. As Marcus sat in his office on a sunny Thursday afternoon, reviewing quarterly reports that showed another period of strong growth, he reflected on how much had changed since that rainy November morning when he walked into a board meeting as an employee and emerged as a partner. Success, he had learned, wasn't about proving others wrong or gaining power over them. It was about creating value, building relationships, and helping others discover their own potential for growth and contribution. Victoria knocked on his door frame, interrupting his thoughts. Ready for the client presentation? Marcus gathered his materials and joined her in the hallway. As they walked toward the conference room together, he couldn't help but smile at how far they had both traveled from that moment when she had tried to put him in his place by reminding him that he would always be staff. She had been wrong about many things that day, but perhaps most importantly, she had been wrong about the nature of hierarchy itself. True leadership wasn't about birth or entitlement. It was about earning the right to guide others through competence, integrity, and a genuine commitment to collective success. And in the end, that was a lesson that had made them both better professionals and better people.